Here's my mess. Just that mess. I earned the money. All right, we are live.
All right, thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. It is 7 p.m. on Tuesday, October 11th, 2022. I now call to order the 2105th regular meeting of the City of College Bay City Council. Thank you all for being here. And Jerry, will you please take roll call?
Mayor Hernandez,
Present.
Councilmember Jessup,
Present.
Councilmember Cleveland,
Present.
Councilmember Espinoza,
Present.
Councilmember Peterson,
Present.
Councilmember Williams,
Present.
Councilmember Sherman,
Present.
and Councilmember Boyle has asked to be excused. We do have a forum.
Great, thank you. Well, you all please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Okay, it's now time for public comment. Sherry, did anyone submit a comment in advance?
I did not receive any written comments.
Okay. And if there's anyone who is present, actual present or virtual attendance that would like to speak. All right.
I'm Angie Peters. I'm a resident of College Place and I'm here with Aniko. She's a member of the Accessible Communities Advisory Committee. She'd like to talk to you guys about roundabouts.
Thank you. Welcome, Nico.
Hello, everybody. Angie, I don't know if you want
Okay, are you
to
ready?
read or what?
Yeah. Yes,
Yes,
yes.
okay. I would like to request permission for an extended length of reading because I am legally blind and I am deaf, and it might be hard for me to read out quickly with my visual impairment. If that is okay with you all.
Yes.
Of course.
Thank you. Okay, this is about roundabout. I know that many of them have been planned and they have been completed, but I would like to express my concerns with it. Okay. Okay, as a visually impaired and profoundly deaf pedestrian, I wanted to express my perspective and thoughts about roundabouts in our area. It appears the popularity and interest in our community is growing. As for any caring community, the goal is to keep citizens safe and find ways to do so by keeping costs down. Recently, I came across a post on Daily Dose of Walla Walla on Facebook, expressing love for roundabouts. The thread was interesting and showed many of our citizens that when there almost all views came from a driver's perspective, no one shared their view as a pedestrian. A city or town would be interested in putting in a roundabout in areas that have a significant amount of accidents. I used to be a driver before losing most of my sight. In driver's education, I learned to stop at red lights, follow signs, as well as learning the right of way. These are basic driving skills all drivers need to know. By adding roundabouts, we are saying people are not utilizing what they've learned in driver's education. So we need to reinvent the wheel. I believe including roundabouts will cost the city more money while decreasing safety. Our year, adding roundabout will have the same effect as just simply removing traffic lights and signage. And just expecting people to be more cautious and watchful. Let's just do that and save ourselves the few dollars. If roundabout would solve issues for both pedestrians and drivers, why are some areas with roundabout adding more signs and lights? Again, this has been happening to some of the roundabouts in the Tri-Cities area. Let us not be fooled. There are pedestrians out there who can cross a roundabout with the same peace of mind and confidence as if crossing a regular intersection, especially those who are blind, deaf, wheelchair bound, or all of the above. A car in a roundabout is watching extra carefully where they need to turn off and when they need to yield to other vehicles cutting in. Sometimes they are not sure which street they want to turn on, so they might forget the signal. Pedestrians watch these signals for cues to park. It's not that easy for a blind or visually impaired individual like myself to see these lights quickly enough, and for the drivers to remember that there are pedestrians out there. The driver doesn't want to miss this turn. For a sight impaired individual, oh my goodness, where is it? I lost my, where is it? Okay, for a sight impaired individual, a roundabout becomes a circle of noise that is almost impossible to navigate. So now, with the new roundabout, people with disabilities are becoming even more isolated in our city than ever before. Checkmated is another way of putting it. Corner. More and more focus is spent on roads and streets and roundabouts, not sidewalks which they can use confidently. Roundabouts prevent them from venturing out as enthusiastically as before. They are not an inclusive plan. So much focus is on I'm sorry, I can't see very good. Angie, okay. Good. I need to find your finger. Okay. So much focus is on drivers and not the pedestrians. Sidewalks are not being fixed or accessible. Disabled people stay safe if they're confined and don't have the freedom to travel and commute like drivers. Yeah, I am one voice with one unique limitation, and I am hoping I can voice for those with their own limitations to open the eyes of our city and give us a bit of support. Yeah, we're okay. We're isolated and not seen, out of sight, out of mind. And now, with so much more focus on drivers and roads, when do those of us who can drive have a chance to be supported? If you believe roundabouts are safe, consider blindfolding yourself or putting yourself in a wheelchair, putting on earplugs, and get out there and give it a try. In all honesty, no. I don't wish for anyone to do that because it is dangerous. But hundreds of other people, disabled people like myself, are putting our own lives at risk to cross those roundabouts in dangerous conditions. And, or also more grave isolation. Please start thinking outside of the box and make real change that helps everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Java. Hello.
Is there anyone else in attendance or anyone who's connected by phone that would like to speak?
There's no one in the attendees list.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so then we're going to move on to the consent agenda, which consists of the agenda for tonight, October 11th, 2022, the council minutes from September 27th, 2022, the council workshop minutes from October 4th, 2022, and excusing the absence of council member Boyle. Are there any items that any member of the council would like to move from the consent agenda at this time?
I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented.
We have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Great, thank you. All in favor, say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Did Ms. Selby vote? Ms. Williams vote?
I did. She's. Councilmember Williams, you're muted.
Sorry, I thought hitting my space bar unmuted me. Aye.
All right, so the vote's unanimous. The ayes have it and the motion is passed. So we have a few, well, actually several presentations tonight. So the first one we have is city engineer Alex Fazzari will present the College Place Walla Walla wastewater treatment consolidation feasibility draft study. So we've all been waiting for it, Alex. So we're excited to hear it.
All right, thank you. So last we spoke was about a couple of months ago with the joint council meeting between College Place and Walla Walla. And at that point, we hadn't wrapped up the study yet, but we presented an overview of where we were at, the status of it at the time. And so this presentation that I have in front of you is really the same presentation with a few more things that we've learned as we wrapped up the study. So some of it will be a little bit repetitive, so I'll try and get through the stuff that we've already covered quickly and emphasize more the new stuff that has come up since we've wrapped up the study. And I understand that last week at the workshop, that Mike presented a copy of that study. That study has been presented to College Place and Walla Walla and the port for review and comment. And so that's the status of that study right now. So second slide, please. You guys see the
Is it,
presentation?
Alex, is it this one or this one? I think it's the second one.
I think it's the second one. Yeah. Yep, that one right there. Great. And you can go to, I don't have the slides numbered, but where we're at today in College Place. So the next slide there. There we go. Great. So just to recap, what's driving this project and where we're at with the city of College Place. At your wastewater treatment plant, there's a compliance schedule that requires some upgrades at your treatment plant by 2024. It's driven by the current permit for the wastewater treatment plant. We did a facility plan and it identified 3 phases of improvements. The phase 1 improvements are the ones that are required to be done by 2024. Future phases 2 and 3, there isn't necessarily a date trigger for them. They'll more be triggered by future permit conditions. Phase 2 is about a $15 million project. Phase 3 about another $30 million project. So potentially significant additional expenses could be coming down the road is really the point there. For the phase 1 project, the design is complete, it's been approved, and is ready to be bid. We did apply for a funding application with Ecology, and they granted a pretty generous funding offer for this phase 1 project. It's about $13.5 million of grant and $16 million in loan. And so with that funding offer, College Place needs to decide by the end of the year whether to accept that funding offer or not. So that's where we're at today. And then with the city of Walla Walla, they're currently constructing some upgrades at their wastewater treatment plant. It's about a $7 million upgrade project. They do have future upgrades identified in their general sewer plan. They're projected to reach capacity about the year 2027, so about 5 years from now. So they're beginning to build a plan to start evaluating the future flows and loads and some future upgrades as well. They have had a recent industrial pretreatment project that has really decreased a lot of the flows and loads at their plant, which is really promising. It shows they have maybe a little bit more capacity than they originally thought, but there's only been 3 or 4 months of data on that, so the jury's still out on that.
I have a question real quick.
Yeah,
So we have phase 2 and 3. If we go back to the slide before that, City of Walla Walla does not have a phase 2 or 3.
no, so they have a general sewer plan that's identified more of a laundry list of capital improvement projects. And so the next couple of big projects, so this first one that they're working on now, you could call it their phase 1, but we basically broke it up into 3 different major projects at their wastewater treatment plant.
So when I look at this data, College Place exceeds Walla Walla through phase 3.
You mean the cost?
Yes,
Yes.
than what Walla Walla is looking at to get through the end of cycle,
Yes.
end of what we're looking at.
Right, and I think the important difference to point out is Walla Walla, those projects identified in Walla Walla's plan are just enough to get them through the next, I think, 5 to 7 years. It's a pretty short time window. And so they haven't done a full-blown facility plan where we look at 20 years of growth and look at the entire wastewater treatment plant facility. That hasn't been done for, I think, 30 years there. And so it's long overdue, and they recognize that. And so that's why right now they're planning on doing a facility plan next year to look at it a little more in depth.
And
So
our plan is looking through
20 years.
20 years.
Yeah.
So
So but
it's not apples and apples.
it's not apples and apples. Theirs is more of a short-term look at
Got
what
it.
they need right now.
Okay.
And the $7 million upgrade that they're doing right now is not capacity related. Their plant is over 20 years old, and they're really just refurbishing old equipment, replacing old electrical equipment, and replacing worn out things. So it's really just rehabilitation.
Thanks.
Yeah, you bet. Yes, so that was the story on where we're at with Walla Walla. Where we're at today with the port. So the port was concerned with the impact of some high strength waste charges. So last year, the city of Walla Walla reevaluated the impact of high strength users on their system and decided to implement a high strength waste surcharge. So that affects a lot of wineries and, for example, Refresco, the juice bottling plant. So they're slowly increasing the rates. They came up with a rate structure where they're implementing it, I believe, over the next 4 or 5 years, where the rates are going to start increasing for these high strength industrial users. Predominantly wineries are the ones affected by it, but the port is as well, because as you know, the port out by the airport operates, that industrial park out there where there's several wineries and breweries out there. So at the port, they operate that complex as their own. And so they have their own water system out there, the port does, they have their own sewer collection system, and then the wastewater passes through a flume, and then they're basically treated as a customer of the city of Walla Walla at that point. And so all of the wastewater that passes through that flume, they're seeing them as one big industrial user. And so that's why their rates are going to go up quite a bit. And so that's why the port was concerned and was interested in this regionalization project. And I think it's interesting to note that there's really only 2 wineries out at the port airport district that meet the city of Walla Walla's classification of a significant user. The rest of the wineries would not. So that's one of the alternatives we looked at was kind of changing the way that is being administered. Next slide, please. So the regional problems to solve. Number 1, the port was concerned about these high strength charges coming from the city of Walla Walla. Walla Walla has several wastewater treatment plant upgrades that they're facing in the near term and potentially in the long term as the other facility plan. And College Place has this phase one project that they're ready to pull the trigger on. And so all of these issues brought together made it appear as though there was a regional project, regional solution to try and solve here. Next slide, please. So the first thing we wanted to look at was the water rights considerations, because this could be a deal breaker on the project one way or the other. In terms of water rights impairment, the Walla Walla wastewater treatment plant, they're required to provide their effluent to the irrigation districts. The irrigation districts have very old water rights claims to the effluent from the treatment plant. So they must provide Class A reuse water to the two irrigation districts. For the College Place wastewater treatment plant, in the summertime, the effluent is land applied on the crops, and then in the wintertime or the non-growing season, it's discharged into Garrison Creek. And so that is something that is part of the permit, is the discharge to Garrison Creek in the wintertime. In terms of the water rights, when we did the facility plan evaluation, we looked at the idea of pulling the water out of Garrison Creek. So we looked at the impact of that at the time. And the analysis that we did at the time was called an impairment study. And it determined at the time that along Garrison Creek, all of the water rights holders all predated when the treatment plant actually started discharging effluent to the creek. So in other words, their water rights weren't reliant upon the wastewater treatment plant effluent, which was a good sign. However, there is a minimum flow requirement in the Walla Walla River for fish. And so that would have been an impairment of pulling the water out of Garrison Creek. And so when we're doing the facility plan analysis, we determined that was too big of a barrier to cross. And that's why we stuck with the plan of continuing to land apply your effluent and continuing to discharge it to the creek in the wintertime. However, with this regional solution on the table, one option is to take that effluent that would otherwise be discharged into Garrison Creek in the wintertime and pump it to Walla Walla, because they would put it into Mill Creek, which eventually gets to the Walla Walla River. So that impairment issue is definitely one that appears feasible, but are one of the issues that we'll need to submit to ecology to make sure that they agree with that. So those are the water rights considerations. So next slide, please. Yeah, so the scope of the regional study, there were three key elements in that study. One, for the city of College Place, what's the feasibility to cost and pump your sewage to the city of Walla Walla? For the city of Walla Walla, what impact would that additional flow and load have on their wastewater treatment plant? And then third, for the port, to try and identify some solutions for their industrial wastewater. So those are the three things we looked at in the study. So on the College Place focus of the study, we looked at two different force main routes for the pipeline between College Place and the Walla Walla wastewater treatment plant. And we developed some cost opinions. And at the time that we met a few months ago, we thought that this alternative would be about half of the cost of this phase one project. And we came to the conclusion that that's not the case. It'll actually be more like about the same cost as the phase one upgrades project. Some things that changed are we recognized the fact that the three wastewater tanks that you have at your wastewater treatment plant, if we used those to hold the wastewater throughout the day and then pump it to Walla Walla at night, that would be just raw sewage sitting in those tanks that would have a lot of odors associated with it. So the extra cost would be covering those tanks and adding some odor treatment to deal with the odors from those. And so that added to the project cost and made it be more comparable with what this phase one project otherwise costs. But we can utilize the treatment plant in that way. In other words, to store your sewage during the day and then pump it to Walla Walla at night when they otherwise have extra capacity at night to deal with the extra sewage. Another alternative that we looked at, and it was really brought up by Councilperson Williams' idea of, let's kind of pump the brakes on this and work our way slowly into this. Let's keep our treatment plant operating as long as we can. And that would be to continue operating your plant as it is today, but build a pump station that pumps not your raw sewage to Walla Walla, but your treated effluent. So you'd continue to land apply the effluent during the summertime, but in the wintertime, when you'd otherwise be discharging to Garrison Creek, that's what you would pump to Walla Walla at that time. And so that was another thing that we evaluated as part of the study as well. And it was one of the newer additions that we did not talk about when we got together a few months ago. Next slide, please. So from the College Place perspective, if we're pumping your raw sewage, not the treated effluent, but the raw sewage, some advantages are, and this first line isn't correct, it's not a lower capital cost. We used to think it was going to be a lower capital cost, but it's really the same cost as the phase 1 project. But one advantage is it would eliminate your discharge permit to Garrison Creek, which is nice, which means phases 2 and 3 might not be required. Some of the assets of the wastewater treatment plant could be repurposed, because you wouldn't necessarily be operating the treatment plant at full capacity and with all of the unit processes. Another advantage is Jacobs is currently operating both College Place and Walla Walla's plant, so there's a bit of continuity there. And then economies of scale. If you sent your sewage to Walla Walla, any future upgrades at Walla Walla's plant would be shared by a bigger ratepayer base. Some of the disadvantages would be relying on Walla Walla for wastewater treatment and disposal. And you would need to work out some sort of fair rate structure with Walla Walla to make sure that you weren't being limited with growth and you had fair rates to charge the customers as well. And one of the disadvantages is that if we sent all of your untreated sewage to Walla Walla, it would push their plant near capacity at that point as well. That's another concern. Next slide, please. However, if we pumped the treated effluent to the city of Walla Walla rather than your untreated sewage, it also would eliminate that Garrison Creek discharge, and phases 2 and 3 would no longer be required, which is nice. Another pro is that Walla Walla does have immediate capacity for your treated effluent, because it would just pass through their filters and their disinfection steps. So it wouldn't have as big of an impact on Walla Walla's plant today. Again, Jacobs is currently operating both of the treatment plants. It also would provide the flexibility to send your effluent to Walla Walla at any time of the year. So even in the summertime, when you are land applying your effluent on crops, if there was some reason that you couldn't land apply your effluent, whether the farmer wanted to do a hay cutting or a pipe broke, you would have the option of pumping to Walla Walla. So it provides some flexibility for the plant operators as well. Also, it retains some autonomy in that you're continuing to operate your plant today, as you're continuing to evaluate some sort of joint sewer utility with Walla Walla. And then if some sort of regional sewer utility is formed between the two, it really acts as a satellite treatment plant. And at that point, the joint sewer utility can decide either to continue operating the College Place plant at that time, or deciding just to pump raw sewage to Walla Walla at that time too. So provide some flexibility with two different facilities. And in terms of the cons or the negatives, still would be relying on Walla Walla for disposal, not necessarily treatment, because you can be providing the treatment, but you will be relying on them for the disposal. And the PCB issue, so that's really the trigger that could force phases 2 and 3 to happen for your plant. And so the PCB is a toxin that ecology is still working out how that's going to affect both of the cities. At some point, it's likely that there will be some sort of advanced filtration project that's required before the effluent is discharged to the surface water. And so that is something that will still need to be dealt with. Even if you send your treated effluent to Walla Walla, there's a good chance at some point in the future, they're going to need to address that problem, and you'll need to cost share in that in some way. And again, we need to resolve some sort of a rate structure between Walla Walla and College Place for sending that treated effluent to them. And then you would also have the cost of continuing to operate your treatment plant every year. Next slide, please.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Is there, and this might be because I haven't been at the workshops, but is there a scenario where Walla Walla might have to send us their raw sewage or? No,
No, that would be very difficult to do.
okay,
College Place is about 20% of the flow and load of Walla Walla, so they have a lot more sewage to deal with. And their effluent, they have to provide effluent to the irrigation districts as well.
thanks.
Yeah. You bet. Okay, so for pumping your sewage to Walla Walla from Walla Walla's perspective. The advantage to Walla Walla is that it creates a regional solution, synergy between communities and more attractive for legislative funding. And just economies of scale. They would have a larger user base to spread future changes or future costs of future changes over. The nice thing about the scenario of pumping your sewage where we held it in the storage tanks during the day and pumped it at night is that for Walla Walla, it allows us to meter it in more smoothly, which is better for their operations, and it allows us to send it at night when they have capacity for it. And again, Jacobs is operating both treatment plants, which would help facilitate that. The negative of that is that I mentioned that their plant is expected to be at capacity in 5 years. And so if College Place adds 20% to that flow and loads, it essentially pushes them to capacity right at that point. So that is a negative from Walla Walla's perspective. And then there's the additional administrative burden that comes along with that. Next slide. But if we were to pump your treated effluent to Walla Walla from their perspective, again, it's still a regional solution for any future upgrades that might be required of their treatment plant. And there's still the economies of scale. But the treated effluent would have less of an impact on their wastewater treatment plant in the near term. And so that makes that a little bit more attractive. Yeah,
You said that if untreated, it's about, we have a flow of about 20% compared to Walla Walla. So how much of a difference does it make from untreated to treated in terms of their capacity? I'm thinking like simplistic numbers, like right now they're 40% below capacity. We say untreated, that's at capacity. If they treated, now it's only 10%, something like that.
yeah, we haven't quantified that. But the bottleneck at Walla Walla's wastewater treatment plant right now is their BOD load. And so if we send your treated effluent, you'd have no impact on their BOD load. You're really just going to be part of their flow. And I don't have the numbers in front of me right here, but they have quite a bit more extra capacity in terms of flow at the treatment plant.
So the treated doesn't really have an impact in terms of the capacity, only the untreated.
Correct.
So, yeah, that's a great question. That's my notes here. So treated, so instead of having to spend the capital expenditures to store it at night, get rid of the smell, cover it, if we to treat it, we get into phase 2 and 3.
No, to treat it, you just continue to operate it like you're doing today. And then the only thing, and so in the phase 1 improvements that are planned right now include a few upgrades at your headworks, which you would need to do either way, and some improvements to the air piping, which is currently leaking, which we would do either way. The other improvements that we might not need to do if you pumped your effluent to Walla Walla include, there's a large storage pond that's planned. And the purpose of that large storage pond is, so there's a window, there's a 4 to 6 month window when you can discharge to Garrison Creek. It's typically the wintertime months. In the spring and the fall, there's a few months where you're not allowed to discharge to the creek, but the weather's also too cool to land apply to the crops because they don't need the water. So that's the problem that needs to be solved right now is there's a few months a year where you have to discharge to Garrison Creek because you have no other place to put the water right now. So the purpose of the storage pond in the phase 1 project is to be that wide spot in the road to store that effluent so that it can be land applied when it needs to. So, yeah.
So we could treat it 365 days out of the year where we would not have to store it, would not have to worry about odor.
Yes, that's right. So right now you have 3 concrete tanks at your wastewater treatment plant. and they're providing biological treatment. And there isn't a lot of odor associated with that because the biology is active. As long as you're continuing to operate your treatment plant the way it's designed, there aren't odors associated with that. But the minute that you shut down that biology and you're just storing raw sewage, because all you're going to do is pump it to the city of Walla Walla, that's where all the odors occur, because there's no longer biology happening there as part of that treatment process.
So with phase one, if we treat it, it's a pass through Walla Walla into the creek, then it's treated, it's good to go.
Yeah, so
And so we don't have to spend the capital to minimize the smell or to cover it.
that's correct.
Okay.
That's correct. The only time you need the covers and the odor control is when you decide we're not operating our treatment plant anymore. We're really only using it to store
Got it.
sewage and pump it to Walla Walla.
And the savings for that would be because that's abandoning our treatment plant and all raw sewage then all raw sewage eventually ends up in Walla Walla.
Yes, yeah, so with the pumping the sewage scenario, you're really just treating, you won't need a large portion of your treatment plant anymore. You won't need
Right.
you won't need the crops to land apply, you won't need the irrigation system to apply, you won't need the storage ponds. You really just need the influence screens, the storage tanks, and then a new pumping facility to pump it to Walla Walla. For the scenario of continuing to operate your treatment plant, but pump your treated effluent to Walla Walla, how that differs from the phase one project today is the money that would otherwise be spent on the storage pond and a lot of irrigation pumping improvements out on the fields where it's land applied. That money is instead spent on a pump station to pump treated effluent and a pipeline to Walla Walla.
And avoids phase 2 and 3.
And it avoids phase 2 and 3.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. Let's see, and so in that scenario, Walla Walla's treatment plant can more easily accommodate that treated effluent. It just needs to pass through their filters and their UV system.
Do you know Walla Walla's thought on this, pumping the treated effluent over to them?
Yeah, so I had a conversation with one of their engineers about it. We haven't received any comments yet on the study, so I don't know for sure, but just an informal conversation is they think it's a good idea. They want to think about it a little bit more, but their initial thought was, yes, this seems like a good solution to us.
Okay.
What are the chances that there is like a cost analysis on these options? You're saying like, hey, the money otherwise used for this will go to that, so on and so forth. Is there any kind of a breakdown by chance at this point in our study, or?
Yes, there is. Yeah. So in our study, we've identified the costs. It's not for the treated effluent, it's just for the sewage.
Yeah.
But the cost of the pump station and pipeline will be the same either way.
So it's comparable.
It's comparable.
Yeah.
Yes, it's comparable.
Councilmember Williams has a question.
Yes.
I have a question specifically on that. In pumping the treated effluent, well, let me back up. In pumping the wastewater, the plan was to use the filter building and put the pump in.
Correct.
Then if we do treated effluent, we would be putting it in just before their filter. Does that mean we could still use the filter building for the pump, or would we need a separate pump house?
No, I think it would be better to have a separate pump house.
Okay.
Yeah.
And is that kind of what you based your costs on? I mean, I don't imagine that's.
Yeah, it's a very cursory cost at this point. So in the study where we discuss this, we note that one idea is to build this sewage pump station in your existing filter building. And then we also say that if instead you want to keep your filter building operational, if we wanted to instead build a separate pump station building, it would add about $1 million to the cost.
Okay.
And so that's where it's a very rough order of magnitude cost. But yes, if we went with the scenario of pumping treated effluent, we would recommend a separate pump building so that you can continue to operate your filters. Because again, the idea is to just take small directional changes to this regional solution so that you have an off ramp. So if for some reason you guys can't come to an agreement, you can continue to operate your plant just the way it is.
And that's what I was wondering about, because if we pull out the filter and put the pumps in, then we're committed to pumping year round to Walla Walla.
Correct. Yeah, that's right. So that's why, you know, if we went with this treated effluent scenario, it wouldn't be that idea of building it in your existing filter building. It would be a new pump station building for that.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, you bet. Okay. So, we really covered a lot of this. The wall focus of the study was really there were two force main options we looked at. We evaluated the impact on their treatment plant. College Place is about 20% of the flow and load. So if we sent your untreated sewage to them, they'd see a 20% increase in flows and loads overnight because of that. And that would push their treatment plant to the max capacity of the VID limit. So that's cause for some concern. And they are planning on doing a facility plan beginning next year where they could take a more detailed look at what impact College Place would really have on Walla Walla's.
So sorry, I don't know if that's a main question that I'm having right now, is that, there's so many questions, but how much of that not being done at the moment is affecting this conversation or idea, the regional plan and or our options? How much of not having that 20-year plan in place affecting this?
Well, I think it affects it quite a bit because we don't know. Yeah, I mean, you saw the number that they have planned, maybe another $20 million of improvements. That's just to get in the near term. We don't know long-term all the improvements that we required. And of those, how much they would expect College Place to cost share. So that's a really big unknown.
So we're essentially trying to make these decisions based on our 20-year thoughts and ideas, but we're basing it on their current 5-year.
Yeah.
And so how much, I don't know if we have this answer. I know I asked this in the joint meeting, so I don't know if you have the answer, so I'm sorry. How much of these decisions are going to affect ecology's, the loan and grant?
Yeah.
Deal with this right now, or, you know what I mean? Like, I guess I'm sorry, I'm not articulating my.
No, I think I know where you're going. So we had a preliminary conversation with Ecology a week ago to try and, because there's still a lot of decisions that need to be made. You know, even after the joint council workshop, some of the action items that you and Walla Walla recognized was the need to go visit with some other recently formed sewer districts, meet with them, talk about the pros and cons, how did you come together, potentially getting the services of a financial advisor to determine how would our rates be split up. If we had a separate collection system and a separate treatment plant, or there was a sewer district associated with the treatment plant, how does that affect our rates? That's another question that needs to be answered. And then also getting some legal counsel opinion on the agreements. Is there an agreement that can be put in place that would make College Place feel comfortable as a customer of Walla Walla? Or do we really need to go down the road of forming a sewer district? There are a lot of decisions that need to be made. And as you point out, Walla Walla still needs to do a facility plan, but we need to make this decision before they begin their facility plan so they can know which alternatives to evaluate. Should they plan on College Places, full flow unload coming, or do they plan on College Places treated effluent coming? So all these decisions need to be made. And then the big decision that's driving everything is Ecology has this funding offer and they want a decision by the end of the year. So we had a conversation with Ecology to say, how can we accept this funding offer and work this out slowly, give both cities time. And so the idea that we pitched to them, and that's jumping to the last slide here, but let's talk about it since we're in the flow here. But it is essentially your funding offer gives you 5 years to spend that money. And so what we had proposed to Ecology was, if we move forward with this concept, we would like to take the money scheduled for phase 1. And instead of the money being spent on the storage pond and the irrigation system improvements, we want to spend that money on a pump station and pipeline to Walla Walla. And that would be a condition of the funding offer that College Place would accept. And beginning next year, since it's already designed, we could go ahead and advertise for bids for the influence screen upgrades and the air piping upgrades, because those are improvements that are required either way, to show Ecology we're ready to start spending the money now. There were also a few other sewer collection system projects wrapped into that. We could start bidding those sewer collection system projects right now as well to show Ecology for spending the money. And then it buys some more time for the two councils to continue to get together and discuss this regionalization option. Let's jump to that last slide real quick here. So that you can see this.
Sorry, man, I'm gonna jump on you.
Yeah, moving forward. No, this is great. This is the meat of it anyways. This is where, these are really all the decisions to be made. So that third bullet there, this is the option that I'm describing. We accept the $26 million funding offer with the caveat that we spend the money intended for the storage pond, UV and irrigation on a pump station and pipeline development instead. So we'd have 5 years to spend the money. In 2023, we start building the first couple of upgrades. We'd spend the next couple of years designing this pump station between between College Place and Walla Walla. And then a few years down the road, maybe 25 or 26, if the cities can come to an agreement, once Walla Walla has done their facility plan, once there are more things known about it, and then if the cities feel comfortable with moving forward, then you build that pump station and pipeline between College Place and Walla Walla. So it buys everyone a little bit more time to become more comfortable with it. And all along the way, if we get to the point where there's an impasse and you need an off ramp, we'll use that phase one money to build your storage pond and your irrigation pump station, continue operating the way it is today. So it really just buys some time for everyone to vet things out a little bit more. They seemed amenable to that when we presented it to them. And they said, if that's the way that you want to go, write us a letter and we will change our funding offer to you and word it according to that, because they feel that the goal of the funding offer was to fix a water quality problem, and either solution fixes that water quality problem. So I guess that's the punchline. That's where we're at today. And so this is what's captured in that study. It's currently being reviewed by the port, by Walla Walla, by College Place. We haven't received any comments yet. I imagine that when we do, we may have some sort of a workshop. Maybe there'll be another joint council meeting to talk about things. But it would be good for us to submit this regional study to ecology. We haven't done that yet because we wanted the port and the two cities to have an opportunity to review it first. It'll be good to submit that to ecology so that they can read it and make sure that they're in agreement with it, in particular with the water rights considerations, because that could be a deal breaker either way. So I think that's a good next step that we need to consider, is submitting this to ecology for review and approval. It would also be good for us to meet with Jacobs, the operators of both plants, to share this with them, make sure we get their thoughts, see if they're in agreement with it. And then ultimately, sometime between now and the end of the year, if this is a decision that both councils agree with moving forward with, we do need to send a letter to ecology acknowledging that and asking them to reformat that funding offer.
I'm not gonna hold you to this answer. So, what, in your professional opinion, is the potential for phase 2 and 3 to come in the next 20 years to College Place?
Well, I've been doing this for 22 years now, and regulations are always getting more strict. I think it's inevitable. It's just a matter of if, it's a matter of when rather than if. I do think it's bound to happen, and in particular, in relation to the PCBs. So the city, I believe it's the city of Spokane Valley or the city of Spokane, they were dealing with similar issues. They installed a state-of-the-art filtration system that's working, but it was very expensive. I have a feeling that's likely going to be required at some point to deal with these PCB issues. And for you to have to build that at your treatment plant would be very expensive. At Walla Walla, it'll still be expensive, but if we do it at one place, there's that economy of scale and it makes more sense. So to answer your question, I think it will happen eventually.
Eventually 10, 25 years?
Boy, it's hard to say.
Okay, you don't know where ecology stands at right now.
We had a meeting with ecology to try and pin them down on this. And they were very non-committal,
slippery.
very slippery.
So phase 2 and 3 is basically the PCB issue?
Yeah, so phase 3, more of the PCB issue. Phase 2 would be Another, I believe it's the ammonia, if there's a stricter ammonia limit, that's what triggers phase 2. Phase 3 is essentially saying you would no longer be allowed to discharge to Garrison Creek, period. And so we need to build a storage pond big enough to hold 3 or 4 months worth of winter wastewater so that you can apply it in the summertime. So it's a super expensive project. But the nice thing about this regionalization idea is now the avenue is opened up to now, if you don't want to discharge at Garrison Creek anymore, if we pump it to Walla Walla, that's your disposal option. And you don't need to discharge at Garrison Creek.
You know, we always come down to this situation when we have these issues, and it's one of these things where we've got communities much smaller than College Place and Walla Walla all over the state. And you've got to wonder what the funding will be in the future when you have a small community somewhere in rural Washington that has to spend $15 million to take care of PCBs.
Yeah, agreed. And ultimately, the PCBs is really tied to whatever water body they're discharging to. So the Walla Walla River was studied, I think it was 10 or 15 years ago. They identified this as being a problem. And so the PCB restrictions came about as a part of that. The city of College Place was able to negotiate periods of time to buy more time to evaluate alternatives. And so that these extensions were granted, and now it's coming to be the point where, okay, enough's enough, now something needs to be done. But you're absolutely right. You know, the rural communities are faced with a lot of these kinds of problems. I know Dayton right now has been struggling with a lot of these problems as well.
So I have another question. If, let's say we went with, or we're thinking about the option of where we're gonna send our treated effluents to Walla Walla, and that's it, that's all we wanna do. What kind of regional system is that considered?
Yeah, so the way that the regional, and to be determined, but the way that I would envision it is your treated effluent wouldn't need to go through the very front end of Walla Walla's plant. It could come in more midstream. So it really just needs to go through their filters and their disinfection process. So it seemed to me that one option would be there could be some sort of user agreement between College Place and Walla Walla, where here's how much you will charge us to send our treated effluent because it has this impact on your facilities. And when our future upgrades are required at your filtration or disinfection steps, we will contribute in the meantime.
Okay,
That's what I would envision it being.
sure. I just wanted to understand how that, it did exactly what I thought it would have to do.
Yeah.
Not so much be a regional system, but be
Yeah,
an agreement.
sure. And then at some point, if the decision's made to form a regional sewer district operated by an independent board, the way that would look is then that board at the time could say, hey, this is great that we have this College Place treatment plant that pumps effluent to Walla Walla's treatment plant. There could come a point in time where they say, you know what? We think it'll be cheaper to not operate College Place's wastewater treatment plant, instead just pump sewage to Walla Walla and treat it all in one. But that could be a decision by that joint board at that
Sure.
time. And this setup gives them the flexibility to do it that way.
Okay.
Mr. Carlton would like to speak, and then Ms. Williams.
Mr. Carlton?
Yes, Alex, is it not true that under the regionalization scenario, it could affect our hardship status and affect the amount of grant we get from the Department of Ecology?
Yes, that's correct. So right now, College Place meets ecology's hardship criteria for funding, which is generally a population less than 10,000. And they look at the median household income and the monthly sewer rates compared to that. And so because you meet this hardship criteria, that's why you were given this great funding deal for the phase 1 project. And so this phase 1 project would pay for these few upgrades at your treatment plant and a pump station between you and Walla Walla. It would cover all of that because you're your own entity right now. In the future, if the two cities form a joint sewer district, that's true, Brian. That joint sewer district would no longer meet the hardship criteria for ecology. And that means grant funding wouldn't be an option at that point. It would just be low interest loan at that point. Similar to what some of the other larger communities in Washington State face.
Unless ecology changed their grant.
Exactly. Yep.
So is Ecology's grant only 10 under 10,000? Because I'm sitting here thinking we might get some housing and in 3 years we might have 10,000 residents. We're at less than 100 short or something. Yeah.
If you look at the current estimates, BioFM is of late, it's like 9902, so we're only like 98 people
See,
off of
so-
10,000.
So we're less than
So, yeah.
100 people.
Yeah.
So get a few more houses. So let's say
We'll lose it
we're,
anyway.
Yeah,
what's that? We lose at 10, there's nothing for
You're gonna-
10,002.
Yeah, that's why
That's the
I think,
cutoff.
I think it would be unfortunate to lose this nice funding offer because you probably won't see it ever again.
Yeah, okay. I just want to make sure that there wasn't grant money for like the middle,
No, so,
medium size.
yeah, there's other funding sources, but ecology's
Yeah.
part of money. The grant funding is mostly for hardship communities.
Got it.
There's also options for what they call green project reserve, where if it saves energy or if it meets some of these other green energy reserve criteria, there's some grant options for that as well. The other option for grant is the city also has an earmark, $3.5 million earmark. So those are the other grant opportunities aside from what ecology typically have.
Kind of hoping for a progressive grant structure like progressive tax
There you go.
structure, or progressive from by population.
Ms.
Yeah.
Williams,
Well, I have a couple of comments that I've kind of been saving for the end, but I did want to say, I'm comfortable with the idea of discharging effluent only on a temporary basis, but I really don't like the idea of giving up our NPDES permit and saying, yeah, we're tied to Walla Walla unless we have a regional utility. Because if one city has the plant and the other city has no option but to send our effluent there, the interests are so different that it's really hard to come to any kind of agreement. But if we have a regional utility that deals with both cities and the port, if they want to, then the city's interests actually become very similar. And I think that we could work together a whole lot better. So that's my recommendation. I'm fine with it temporary, but with the, I really, really appreciate the timeline that you've laid out here in negotiating that with Ecology, Alex, because you know, what that says as we go into those negotiations is we have this much time to come to an agreement. And, you know, if we don't, we have another option. I hate negotiating when you have no other option. It's just,
Absolutely.
it's human nature. It's not going to go well.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, and that's a great observation. I agree completely. And your current permit gives you that option of discharging to Garrison Creek as you need. Ecology, we asked Ecology when we can expect a new permit, and they didn't really have an answer other than to say it'll probably be sometime in the next couple of years. But there's currently only one engineer on their staff. They're very short staffed. So
One of the,
I think continuing to operate under your existing permit as long as you can is a huge advantage to the city. And that's why I think we should feel comfortable with that moving forward and hope that Ecology doesn't issue a new permit anytime soon. Because when they do issue that new permit, that'll certainly be something we'll want to talk about with them, is that discharge to Garrison Creek and providing that ability for that so that you don't lose that until you feel comfortable not needing it.
yeah, one of the comments I was going to make when you were talking about when the PCB requirements are going to go in, it has an awful lot to do with the level of Ecology's funding. Because that's not going to go in until you get a new permit. And when you get a new permit is going to depend exactly on, you know, does Ecology have the people to do it? So.
Yeah, I agree with that. And it's also somewhat related to EPA's testing methods as well. So right
Yes.
now, there's a PCB limit in the existing permit, but there isn't an EPA approved testing method that measures down to the precision needed for it.
Yeah.
And so that's a bit of a saving grace right now, but that could change.
Yeah.
You know, there could be better, you know, it all comes down to technology. As technology improves and they're able to detect things at lower and lower limits, they'll start enforcing things at lower and lower limits. Yeah. It's hard to know when that's going to occur, but
I can tell you that I believe it will happen eventually, just because that's the trend.
Sure. Well, you know, and I know this is obviously where we still need a discussion, but I think most of us, the feeling I'm getting is a customer is out of the question. We will not be a customer. I don't think any of us feel comfortable with that situation.
Yeah,
Sorry, I'm kind of backtracking a little bit because I've been bothering me a little bit. Is this a relevant time to ask about the force main, or is that far down the road that any questions about that wouldn't be relevant?
no, yeah, we've just kind of did a cursory look at that, but yeah, any questions you have on
Is
that?
that a part of that? You said the pump station, so on and so forth, is the Route A and Route B, a couple things, is that a part of that initial phase funding and work that you would do anyway?
Yeah, so if we move forward with this concept as I laid out on that last slide, what we would, so you have a current funding offer of $2.5 million for the design of the phase one upgrades.
Yeah.
We've only spent, I think 1.8 million of that. So there's a remainder there that could be used to design that pump station and force main.
And the force main too with it.
Yeah, so I forget what year, I know for doing the design, I think it's in a year or two, but
Yeah.
once that design process begins, that's when we would further vet those two force main routes. We'd further vet, you know, where we put the pump station, and that's where more of the design details will come out, is during the design of that pump station.
So there's currently funding for the design. It's just not, we just gotta figure out the rest later.
Yeah, well, yeah, so if we send this letter to ecology with this plan, what we'd say is, we would like to use the remainder of the funding offer for design to pay for a pump station and pipeline. And potentially use this phase one construction money to build it. But we need a few more years of working together before we're ready to pull the trigger on building something.
Councilmember Williams would like to speak.
Thank you for that perfect introduction, because my last comment that I haven't highlighted that we already talked about is about the routes A and B. And I think we are talking about, and I think it was part of the tax increment financing thing, Mike, where we and Walla Walla would work together to market the land along Myra Road. And so I think that if we go the long way, then we should ask for some capacity in the Myra Road main. So for example, if somebody builds, you know, over there in that big empty spot on Whitman behind the Home Depot, they could just hook up to that main. You see what I mean? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So when we talk about that marketing, I think we should talk about that as well, and kind of, you know, bring it all together, and just, you know, all the stuff we're doing with Walla Walla.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Initially, Walla Walla's thoughts on those force main routes are the one that connected to the Myra Road trunk. They said we'd want to further evaluate if there's enough capacity in that pipeline as we look at our build out. We want to make sure we're not giving up any capacity we might need. So that's certainly something that would need to be evaluated as part of that design process for the pump station pipeline.
Well, and I have no idea what size the main is in Myra Road, but I strongly suspect that it's not going to be big enough for all of College Place, plus the stuff that we all want to build, you know, out that direction. So I want to make sure that we don't fill that up. And then, oh, we want to put in a big box. Well, we're going to have to put in a whole new sewer. See what I mean?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and when we did a analysis of Walla Walla's sewer collection system, I think back in 2015, where we did a hydraulic model of all of the pipelines and looked at the build out for their master plan to show how much flow might go down that pipeline. So there's some information there that we can use to help inform that.
Perfect.
And you did say that having a dual force main would increase potentially 15% of redundancy, but it may not be redundancy, it might be necessary.
Yes.
I know it's rough numbers, but
Yeah.
15%.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So if that's a good point. I didn't bring that up. If we were to pump your untreated sewage to Walla Walla, that was another thing that came up after the last time we spoke, was someone recognized the fact that we probably should have dual force mains for redundancy. Because if one pipeline goes down, then we would need the other one. If we were just pumping your treated effluent, we wouldn't need the redundancy anymore.
Ms. Williams?
I also wanted to say, Alex, that I was really impressed with this report. This is an excellent report. I'm planning to show it to my students as, when I tell you to write a report, this is what I'm talking about. So
Great,
I
thank you.
really appreciate it.
After that, we have a good team. Yeah.
So we're looking at route A and B here for the force main. If we were pumping the treated effluent, would we have to go with option A? Because it looks like option B connects into their trunk line, which means they would just be going into their regular plan.
Yes, that's correct. I think if we go with the treated effluent option, route A makes the most sense because
Yeah,
we
we
want
go
to pick
there.
strategically where we enter that into the plan. Yeah, absolutely.
Right, any other questions or comments?
Sewer district level.
I appreciate this. I think the clarity is getting there,
Getting
from our-
there.
and I appreciate that from our first discussions of, we're making these steps to understanding of the options.
Thank you, Alex.
Yeah.
I know we're taking a lot of your time, but we really appreciate it.
Yeah, but these are important decisions.
They are big decisions and ones that are gonna outlast us, right?
When you were a kid, is this where you pictured yourself?
Not at all. I grew up working in, my family owned a restaurant, a pizza place, so I was busy making pizza. I just knew I didn't want to do that. That's hard work.
Thank you.
Right.
Thank you, Alex.
Okay.
Have a good night. Thank you. Oh, a lot to ponder, isn't it? All right, so let's go on. Okay, the next item is annual Unified District Code update presented by Community Development Director John Vickers.
Thank you, Mayor. So it's hard to top that last discussion. So over the last year, the Planning Commission has been working on primarily affordable housing implementation tools. So before you, we have the draft amendments to the Unified Development Code. It's been through a number of workshops with the Planning Commission. We put it out for public comment back in July and August. It's been sent to the Department of Commerce for their review. And we had our public hearing last month in September. And so Planning Commission is recommending approval of this to the council. Greg Dorn's with us tonight to kind of cover the highlights and but like I said, primarily it's their tools to increase the housing supply and hopefully provide more options for affordable housing. And then there's also a new tool in our toolbox called the Master Plan Development that they're recommending as well. So with that, I'll turn it over to Greg.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the City Council. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, and good morning. I mean, good evening.
Well, it was a good morning and good evening. Mayor and members of the council, as John said, every year we go through a process with the Planning Commission and with the public to review and consider updates to the city's development regulations. This year, the primary focus was on amendments that would help implement the regional housing strategy in College Place. But there are actually 4 categories of changes that are included in the Planning Commission recommendation. I'll go over them briefly, And Mayor, if you would like, I could certainly expand on any of them. But the four categories of changes, as John said, start with measures to help implement the Regional Housing Action Plan. We went through all the recommendations in that plan, found that the city had already taken a number of actions. So it was very much in alignment with the thinking behind and the recommendations within the Housing Action Plan. We identified 3 additional amendments that could be made that would have we believe, a positive benefit or impact within the community. The first one is to eliminate the maximum lot coverage standard or requirement in the single family and multifamily residential zoning districts. It is not uncommon for communities to have a standard that says something like no more than 30% or 40% or 50% or 70% of a lot should be covered with impervious surfaces. But what we have found over time is that while that standard is well intended, it really doesn't have a significant benefit or impact on stormwater management, but it does have an impact on the ability to effectively and efficiently use existing land and property that is served by city services for housing. So eliminating that maximum lot coverage requirement, you'll still have setback requirements. There's still going to be building height requirements, still going to be parking requirements and the like, but it's going to give property owners greater flexibility and more options in terms of how they are able to use and configure their lots. And so that's the first change. The second change would be to allow duplexes to be constructed on the same size lot as single family residences, 6,000 square feet. The rationale is that you could have a single family residence and an accessory dwelling unit on a 6,000 square foot lot. So why not allow a duplex in the same situation and eliminate what might be considered a bias or a disincentive for the construction of duplexes? And the third change that would be made, and with this change, the city would have be in a position to say, I've done everything that it could to implement the Regional Housing Action Plan. And that would be to eliminate the maximum density standard in the multifamily residential zoning district and have the maximum density be based on building height, building setbacks, parking, landscaping. Lot coverage would no longer be applicable, building codes and the like. And so it would give the development community the opportunity to be creative, to respond to what the interest there is in the market, and not set an arbitrary standard or limit the number of dwelling units per acre. So those are the categories of that would fall in the first category of changes. The remaining action items to fully implement the Regional Housing Action Plan. Let me stop with that one, Mayor, and see if there's any questions, because we can change subjects with the next category. So any questions from you or the council about those 3 proposed changes?
And Councilmember Friedman?
So you were saying you would eliminate the density maximum for multifamily residential?
Yes, so that would mean then that it would be up to the developer to determine how many dwelling units they could put on an acre, provided that they comply with all the other standards such as building height, setbacks, parking, landscaping, and the like.
I'm looking here at the City of College Place, Washington Ordinance 22-XXX Exhibit A. And I was just looking at, there's that category, maximum density dwelling units per acre. And on multifamily residential, they have 31 crossed out and then 16 in its place.
the 16 is a footnote.
Oh, I
And,
see.
and it refers then down to that density it shall be based on the applicable standards, meaning complying with the other code requirements.
I see, okay. I was misunderstanding that then.
I have a question on the maximum density, back to that one. And because I don't know our current codes this way, you know, they're building those very, very tiny apartments, the 200 square foot apartments. And how would that fit into this? I mean, and, you know, what would this maximized density allow? Let's say, would it allow for 3,100 square foot apartments?
There would, you still have to meet the requirements of the International Building Code. So there are requirements for dwelling units that must be met in terms of, you know, things like, you know, bathrooms, kitchens, sleeping and the like. So you still have to meet the International Building Code. You'd still have to meet parking requirements, building height, building setback, but that would provide some options to the property owner and developer, whether they were to build larger units with multiple bedrooms, smaller units, studios. And one of the aspects of affordability then is, it tends to relate to the size of the dwelling unit. And so the smaller units for the right person might be at a price that is more affordable than, say, some of the more traditional apartments. And that's one of the things that we're seeing now in the housing market, is more and more kind of creative approaches to find ways of delivering a quality product to individuals and families.
And to add to that, Mayor, there's nothing in our development code right now that would prohibit a developer from coming in and building a micro apartment complex. That it could be a larger one in terms of the number of units in there, but again, as Greg's been pointing out, you'd still have to, you know, comply with the parking requirements and the landscaping and setbacks.
Councilmember Peterson?
Yeah, general question. These three changes, are these replicated off of another city's ordinance or guidelines?
They are, there was, in the Regional Housing Assistance Plan, there was a series of recommendations that were made. Most, if not all of them, are things that are being implemented in other communities, either in the Walla Walla region, throughout the state, throughout the country. The specific changes are changes or amendments to the city's development regulations. But all of them are based on experiences from other communities.
Thank you.
Councilmember Cleveland?
So in essence, we're exchanging one upper bound of 31 dwelling units per acre for kind of a more vague maximum density based on other criteria. Do we have any idea of what, you know, using the criteria of complying with the International Building Code, et cetera, what kind of maximum density a developer could manage to get per acre?
John, do you have a sense of that?
Well, you know, we haven't seen developers actually hit the ceiling thus far with the 31 units, the acre. They're getting close. It's a matter of, you know, we've made some changes to our parking standards. For instance, now under our current code from previous years, we only require one parking space per one unit or one bedroom or studio apartment, instead of 1.5 units per space. I think that we would see a increase in trying to achieve a higher density. by eliminating the lot coverage and by eliminating that maximum density. I just don't, we haven't run the numbers.
Kind of wondering because there's been a planned development next door to me for a few years, which I think COVID paused and a few other things, and it was supposedly a fairly large project. I don't remember exactly, maybe it was like 6 or 8 buildings with like 6 or 8 units per one, so it's kind of a hefty increase in the neighbors. I was just kind of curious if that person was interested in redesigning their project, how many more neighbors might I expect, but sounds like we don't necessarily know.
Well, that particular development, I mean, in any development, it comes back to the model that the developer, what their product is. How many parking spots, even though, we've lowered the parking requirement, we're still seeing developers come in and say, well, I still have my own standard of 2 parking spaces per rental unit, regardless of the number of bedrooms. And you see that across the board in many different development types.
Any other questions? All right, we're ready to move on.
Okay, Mayor, the second category of amendments establishes a new section in the city's code and authorizes the proposal and approval of master plan developments in any of the city zoning districts. It is that designation would be at the city's discretion. It would lend itself typically or would, I think, most ideally fit with larger scale projects, larger properties, and properties that was going to be implemented in phases over time. I'm involved with another community right now where it involves about 180 acres, and it involves a mix of commercial, light industrial, residential uses, and it's going to be implemented in phases. And that's an example of, I think, a good use of that tool, where the community, the neighbors, everybody has a chance to see what's going to occur at the end and can make appropriate plans, recognizing that the development may occur in pieces. In this particular case, the process has several opportunities for meaningful public involvement early on, during, and at the end of the process. Environmental review will also be an important part of that. So an opportunity to look at what kinds of impacts there may be and to what extent has the project sponsor been able to avoid or minimize potential adverse impacts to their design. And it ultimately would come to the city council as a approval of a master plan, and it would most likely involve the approval of a development agreement as well, which is a form of a contract, which would spell out the obligations of the developer, any obligations that would fall to the city, and would be memorialized as a written contract. So it was very clear about what the obligations are. So this is a tool that will provide a degree of public flexibility, but ensures a high level of public involvement. And in this day and age, that kind of combination of flexibility and involvement is something that communities are finding to be very useful and valuable. And I know that the city administrator, who is talking with developers and development and community regularly, can see and appreciate the advantages that this would, or the usefulness that this tool would provide to the city. So at this point, I'll stop, Mayor, to see if there's any questions about this new section of code that would allow for master plan developments within the city.
Do we have any questions? Doesn't look like it. Anybody online? Nope, okay. All
The
right,
last
those
two are a bit easier, Mayor. There are a number of what we call housekeeping amendments or revisions. Typically, these are matters to clarify provisions in the code. They arise during the course of the year when there's a question or when we see in working through and utilizing the code that there something wasn't as clear as we thought or could be made clearer. And so there are 3 or 4 minor amendments that fall in the category of housekeeping amendments to clarify standards and how things would be measured and determined. So I am not going to go into any detail, Mayor, unless you, a member of the council, have a question about one or more of these minor housekeeping amendments. But they are all based on questions or issues that came up during the course of the past year.
Any questions? Nope. No, okay. It doesn't look like any questions. It was easy.
And then, Mayor, the final one is in reviewing the zoning map and John and having some discussions with the owner of 2 nursing home or assisted living facilities. We discovered that when we updated the zoning map recently and changed some of the zoning districts and designations, that there were 2 parcels that were improperly zoned or designated as single family residential. They should be designated multifamily residential. That's consistent with their current use. That's consistent with the future land use designation. So this is simply just a technical correction to the maps so that they accurately, so that the zoning aligns with the current and future land use. And that is the final change. It also would fall in the category of a housekeeping measure or a technical adjustment to correct the map.
All right. Any questions or comments on that one? All right. Doesn't look like it, Greg. We made it easy for you.
Great. Well, super. Thank you so very, very much. And John will be back at the next meeting. Is that correct?
I think so. Ree wants to do a legal review of the proposed amendment. So hopefully we'll be able to bring this back to you at the end of the month or the first meeting in November.
Great. Mayor and council, thank you very much. And whenever that is, we look forward to seeing you again soon.
You as well. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, good morning. Might as well have a good night. All right, so let's see. Moving on. Okay, we have a couple of proclamations that I will be reading, and I'll try to get to the. I had that proclamation pulled up. I had it. Oh, here it is. Pulled up the whole time, and I can find it. Okay, so the first proclamation is on Arbor Day. So whereas Arbor Day was established in 1872 by J. Sterling Morton of Nebraska as a day set aside to plant trees, and whereas Arbor Day is now observed throughout the nation and the world, and whereas trees can reduce erosion by wind and water, lower our heating and cooling costs, moderate the temperature, clean the air, produce oxygen, and provide habitat for wildlife. And whereas the addition of trees to the landscape has been shown to stimulate economic development. And whereas the city of College Place recognizes that trees and parks are important to enhance the beauty of the city and actively encourages the planting and care of trees throughout the city. And now, therefore, I, Norma L. Hernandez, Mayor of the City of College Place, Washington, do hereby proclaim October 25th, 2022, College Place Arbor Day. And appeal to the residents of College Place to celebrate Arbor Day by attending a tree planting ceremony at 10:30 a.m. on Tuesday, October 25th, 2022 at Kiwanis Park with Davis Elementary School students. I further encourage residents to plant and care for the trees in College Place for the well-being of this and future generations. Given under my hand and seal as the mayor of the city of College Place, Washington, this 11th day of October, 2022. All right. Next one. So proclamation and recognition of October 12th, 2022 is Indigenous Peoples' Day. Whereas the city of College Place recognizes Indigenous people have lived upon this land since immemorial and values the process of our society has accomplished, throughout the contributions of the Indigenous people's culture. And whereas natives and non-natives have shared this community for hundreds of years, and the Indigenous people have provided us friendship, guidance, and protection. And whereas other cities and communities locally and around the country have declared their own Indigenous People Day, and whereas the city of College Place acknowledges and honors the rich culture, heritage, and achievements of First Nations, Walla Walla, Umatilla, and Cayuse people in our valley. And whereas the city of College Place is committed to being more just, equitable, and welcoming city for the people who call College Place home, and recognizes its shared responsibility to honor our nation's Indigenous roots and history, traditions, and cultural contributions. Now therefore be it resolved, I, Norma L. Hernandez, Mayor of the City of College Place, Washington, do hereby proclaim October 12 as Indigenous Peoples' Day, and urge residents to respect and honor our diverse community and celebrate and continue to build a culture of inclusiveness and acceptance. Dated this 11th day of October, 2022. And finally, a proclamation in recognition of October as Italian American Heritage Month. Whereas College Place's Italian American community has contributed greatly to the cultural fabric and demographic landscape of this diverse city since its earliest days. And whereas Italians began migrating to the United States in 1880, and today there are more than 26 million Americans of Italian descent in our country. And whereas the city of College Place is home to a proud and vibrant Italian American community that has undoubtedly impacted culture and industry. And now I therefore resolve that I, Norma L. Hernandez, Mayor of the City of College Place, Washington, do hereby proclaim October 2022 to Italian American Heritage Month in College Place, and encourage all residents to join in celebrating the many contributions of Italian Americans. Dated this day, 11th day of October, 2022. All right, thank you. Am I yelling those kind of loud?
No, it's good.
Good job.
Yeah.
All right, so next we're gonna go through, we're gonna go for public hearings that we're at.
No, there's none.
There's no public hearings. Okay, then we're moving on to action items. There's several did you have a question?
No.
Oh, okay. There's several action items on the agenda tonight. So, first, City Administrator Mike Rizzatello will present on the Vesper project downtown Catalyst incentive application.
You have
2 minutes. Go.
Yep. This was introduced, past council meetings, went through Economic Development Commission. We were petitioned for this. The Downtown Catalyst incentive dates back 2020. This is the first development to actually take advantage of it, which is pretty exciting. It introduces 1 and 2 bedroom apartments on a College Avenue corridor. We basically need that to be able to support businesses that are open later, which would be a nice thing to have. And with that, this would be at least on side, but one of the first like multi-story developments on College Avenue. So this is definitely a big deal, running in tight margins, and therefore that's why they are asking for this incentive. It amounts to just around 10,000. Developer, Mr. Rod Shearer, he has a track record, has done a lot of these projects all through the Pacific Northwest. So Economic Development Commission, they recommended granting the full incentive, and thus that is before you this evening.
Okay, thank you, Mike. We're gonna go through council members for questions or comments. Councilmember Jessup,
Questions or comments? Thank you.
okay, Mr. Cleveland,
No question.
Mr. Espinosa,
No questions.
Mr. Peterson,
No questions.
Ms. Williams,
No questions?
Ms. Sherman. Okay, if there's no additional discussion, is there a motion?
I'll motion to adopt resolution 22-071, which awards full downtown catalyst incentive best for development.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I'll second.
We have a first and a second. Any additional discussion? All right, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, the ayes have it. The motion is passed. Thank you, Mike. Congratulations on getting that going.
Thank you.
Next is the resolution of support for ecology water quality financial assistance grant program for Southeast Birch from 4th to 6th Avenue. Mr. Zatello.
Thank you. So the next three of them are for the same grant program under State Department of Ecology. They received a large influx of the bipartisan infrastructure grant funds. So now is the time to be going after all projects we can to get the grant funded. Historically, it's a 75-25 split. They've classified us as near hardship where we can get up to 85-15, and there's some messaging out of Department of Ecology due to the amount of influx of grant money. It could be as high as 95-5 because of the amount of federal money. So now's the time to go after this. All of these are in our stormwater master plan. As you know, a creek goes under Birch, should have proper drainage. It doesn't. If you go out there, the street looks like a cobbler because of that. So in this case, we're using the ARPA money to do the engineering. This is for construction, so we can make it happen.
All right. Spoke to council members. Mr. Jessup,
No, thank you.
Mr. Cleveland.
Nope.
Mr. Espinosa,
No questions.
Mr. Peterson,
No questions.
Ms. Williams,
No questions?
Ms. Sherman. All right. Is there a motion?
I move to adopt resolution number 22-072, which supports the city's grant application to the State Department of Ecology Water Quality Financial Assistance Program for Southeast Birch Avenue, 4th to 6th stormwater improvements.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second, Councilmember Jessup.
Any additional discussion? All right, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, the ayes have it. The motion is passed. Okay, next is the resolution of support for ecology water quality financial assistance grant for Northeast Earl Lane design. You don't need to repeat your
I don't need
same
to repeat
presentation.
I don't need to repeat the grant. The only difference here is if you all recall a couple of years ago, this was tied in with the Destino improvements. We weren't able to do it because Destino had such high overruns. Flooding is continuing on Earl. We need to deal with it. So this would do the design.
Okay. Mr. Jessup?
No.
Mr. Cleveland? Mr. Espinosa?
No questions.
Mr. Peterson?
No questions.
Ms. Williams?
No questions?
Ms. Sherman?
No question.
Okay, there's no additional discussion. Is there a motion?
Motion to adopt resolution number 22-073, which supports the city's grant application to the State Department of Ecology Water Quality Financial Assistance Program for Northwest Earl Lane design.
Thank you.
Second.
Great, we have a first and a second. Any additional discussion? All right, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it. The motion is passed. All right, next is the resolution of support for ecology water quality financial assistance grant for Southwest 10th Street between College and Bay. Anything we need to know there?
This is companion to what we did on Southeast 10th a couple years ago. Same thing, step other side of the street,
Okay,
with the same bucket of money as the others. So
Okay.
that we just covered.
any questions, Mr. Jessup,
No, thank you.
Mr. Cleveland,
No question.
Mr. Espinosa,
No questions.
Mr. Peterson,
No questions.
Ms. Williams,
No questions?
Ms. Sherman?
No questions.
Any additional discussion? Okay, Mr. Peterson, would like to make a motion?
I'd like to move to adopt resolution number 22-074, which supports the city's grant application to the State Department of Ecology Water Quality Financial Assistance Program for Southwest 10th Street, College to Bay Avenue design work.
Thank you. There's a second.
I'll second.
Any additional discussion? All right, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Right, the ayes have it and the motion is passed. All right, let's move on to the contract with Stowe Strategies to conduct the tax increment finance study. Mr. Zatello.
Okay, this was talked about at length at workshop, basically some of the ways to get the infrastructure to help with economic development down at the Stone Creek Lakeside area as well as downtown College Place is due tax increment financing. State finally approved it in 2021. We were the only state that didn't allow it, which is why compared to other areas, we were, I would say, a stalemate with that sort of investment. And just to clarify some questions out in the community, this is not an additional tax. So basically what happens is you get a consultant that knows what they're doing, like Mr. Stowe, and then they develop essentially what the increment is. So what the development would be essentially 2 decades on what that increment in the taxes is. You combine against that and essentially build the infrastructure and make it happen, which in our case is the Majanier. There's going to be a gap on Majanier because of inflation. East-West Road through there with the likely a stoplight by the high school. And then what we've been going after, trying to go after the last several years, which is to get the downtown shared parking lots going so we can waive the parking requirement and get the small businesses all along College Avenue. So really, we need to get this consultant. The staff is buried here to do it itself. Plus, I would argue in many respects, you could view it as in a way, conflict of interest. It just lends more public credibility, having a third party doing it, brand new. Stowe and Eco Northwest, they're the only ones handling it for the city paradigm. So that's what's before you.
All right, thank you. Any questions or comments, Mr. Jessup?
No, thank you.
Mr. Cleveland?
That's right.
Mr. Espinosa?
No questions.
Mr. Peterson?
Okay.
Ms. Williams?
No questions, thank you.
Chairman?
No question.
Okay, great. There's no additional discussion. Is there a motion?
I'll motion to adopt resolution 22-025, which authorizes the city administrator to sign tax increment financing, planning and prospectus contract with Stowe Development Strategies not to exceed $58,500.
Councilmember Williams, second.
Great. Any additional discussion? All right, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, the ayes have it and the motion is passed. Next, Mr. Rizzatello will also be presenting the resolution of support for the Federal Department of Transportation, which will be Connecting Communities Grant for State Road, Route 125 corridor.
Yeah. So in this case, a lot of the community members have reached out to us over the years over several things ranging from sound walls along the state highway over by Country Estates to some sort of additional pedestrian crossing link the two sides. Because the age of the city and the urbanized area, we can fund that. However, this new program the feds have does, however, first they'll fund planning studies to determine if it's a valid concern or not. If it is, then there's an implementation portion where they'll essentially pay 80-20 and make the improvements. WASDOT, they will not fund those sort of improvements because of the various warrants and the traffic count warrants, as well as age of development. It has to be 1970 or earlier. So this seems like one of the only opportunities to essentially answer some of those concerns, besides the comment of we don't really have funding to do that. So, yeah.
And we've gotten a lot of comments about the noise over there.
And the pedestrian crossing thing is of late, which is weird.
It's
So,
quite a bit.
yeah.
All right, let's go to council members. Mr. Jessup,
No, thank you.
Mr. Cleveland,
We're looking at potentially looking at feasibility of sound walls. Are those generally concrete? Or are there like natural ones like vegetation or trees that we could do?
There's both. Essentially, that study would answer A, if they're needed, and B, what type, so.
That's a good question. Mr. Espinosa,
No questions.
Mr. Peterson,
No questions.
Ms. Williams,
No questions. Thank you.
Sherman?
No question.
All right. If there's no additional discussion, is there a motion?
I'll motion to adopt resolution number 22-076, which supports the city's grant application to the Federal Department of Transportation Connected Communities Program for State Road 125 corridors, Myra to College Planning Project.
All right, any additional discussion? All right, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it and the motion is passed. All right, lastly, for action items, Mr. Vitello will present on the Walla Walla County Emergency Management Interlocal Agreement update.
This is just general housekeeping. They provide our emergency management services, updating definitions of like what is a city, as well as RCWs tied to emergency management. And then also some languages to quorum law pertaining to this type of management committee. So that way, after a couple times, if the county quorum rules aren't met, they could still meet because they were having trouble getting some stuff passed because of
That's right.
representation, but from some outlying towns not showing up. So really just housekeeping items but really beyond that, business as usual, but it needs updated.
Yes, okay. Mr. Jessup,
No, thank you.
Mr. Cleveland,
No question.
Mr. Espinosa,
No questions.
Mr. Peterson,
No questions, thank you.
Ms. Williams,
No questions. Thank you.
Ms. Sherman.
No question.
Is there a motion then?
I'll make a motion to adopt resolution number 22-077, which adopts the 2022 interlocal agreement for emergency management services through Walla Walla County.
Second.
Great. Any additional discussion? All right, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Right, the ayes have it and the motion is passed. Thank you, Mr. Rizzatello. Oh, we're on to administrative
Yeah.
reports. So the first administrative report is the draft for fiscal year 2023 to 2028 capital facilities plan.
This is just on there as a reminder to take a look at it. If you have any questions, please let me know. First year is more concrete. Anything marked high, we're gonna try and make happen no matter what. Medium and low tend to be dependent upon grants, and basically over 52% of the plan is dependent upon grants as well as developers paying their fair share. So that's the key takeaways. And for each of functions, the key projects we're rallying around next year is Lions Park for parks. For streets, it's getting Majanier figured out. For water, it's getting the additional third well, the engineering on the going well 7. Wastewater, it's what you just witnessed with the treatment plan. And then with storm, it's a combo of the DeCamp facility and some of the other road projects that y'all just approved the resolutions of support for. So, yeah.
Okay, great. We'll go through questions. Mr. Jessup,
No, thank you.
Mr. Cleveland,
No question.
Mr. Peterson,
No questions, thank you.
Mr. Espinosa,
No questions.
Ms. Williams,
No questions. Thank you.
Ms. Sherman?
Nope.
All right. Next is the draft fiscal year 2023-2028 equipment replacement plan.
Okay, thank you. Really same general concept, this forecast out for the next 6 years. First year is more concrete, additional 5 years are for the planning period. We've made significant headway relative to other years because the fire truck, the Stellar, all that was with the ARPA money. So really it's moving forward on some items really in streets, continuing the police lease, but in general, we're making a lot of headway in this avenue. So take a look at if you have any questions, and then I or respective department head will get back to you.
Anybody have any questions at this time? I'm not gonna go through everybody.
Just a quick comment, I was just, Mike, the city, representation of the city has really improved. I was, some of our vehicles, the new ambulance, some of the city maintenance trucks, I would say, and what's the large truck I saw on the parade the other day,
Code enforcement?
code enforcement, and there was it puts out, fires. on-
Wildland, fire truck.
Yeah, that truck. What a change over the last few years. It just has a real professional, clean look, and as we continue in the future, just wanted to, I've noticed that over the last one we do, yeah.
No more than the little small Ford Rangers.
Yeah.
Right, the 4-cylinder Ford Rangers. Any other questions or comments? All right, then let's go on to the 2023-2028 Information Technology Plan draft.
Okay, same concept. First year is more concrete. Anything beyond that is for the planning period. Relative to past years, this one's a lot more straightforward. Because in the past, we were trying to add a lot of items. A lot of this now is maintenance agreements and such. The heavy lift this year is the implementation of our ERP system, which is Tyler. And that essentially is going to merge in finance, community development, that 311 portal that was explained the last workshop. And then also we're moving asset management over there as well. So there'll be interfaces with all that, and it'll really get efficiency for various departments. That's really the big heavy lift next year. And then also moved in Office to Microsoft Office 365 to enable remote work and better.
Is that the IT version of the nice new vehicles for?
Yes.
That's it.
Right?
Yep.
But no one gets to see.
Yeah.
No, it's-
All right, any questions for council?
So our spring surprise, support fees.
Yeah.
It's worked well in the budget, so far?
It's been, I mean, I will tell you, it's definitely been a challenge, but it's not like we had much of a choice.
Yeah.
I informed them again going in next year, you better not pull that. I will definitely, I will tell you right now, the benchmark I'm evaluating on that. Because my brother-in-law is IT person up in the Spokane area. For a city of our size to adequately cover that in-house with benefit salary, you need 2 people. And that would amount to 190,000 if we brought it in-house. So at the moment, we're trapped at the moment.
And once you train them.
Yeah.
They
leave. Yeah, now just to throw it out there, what's interesting, IMESD is that the city of Hermiston, they had enough jurisdictions around them where they actually are going out on their own, and Umatilla and several of the communities immediately out in that direction are contracting with Hermiston because they could provide it at a lower value. However, they do not want to come all the way out here, and Wall is actually having problems keeping their IT department staff. So we're between a little bit of a rock and a hard place there.
Yeah.
I just had to rub it in.
Yeah.
I just have one comment in that little IT plan book that I was gonna say that there's an extra R in my name, but there's also 3 Z's in yours, so.
Okay.
I guess we're out.
That works.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're balanced.
Any other questions or comments regarding the information technology plan? All right.
And the lack of the use of spell check.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Sherman and Marcello probably you don't think.
Yeah.
All right, the 2023 state and legislative agenda draft, Mike.
Went through this at the last workshop, just take a look at the key priority projects are naturally wastewater treatment plant. The Western water system improvements, that includes a tank and a new well out there. The Decant facility, and then also Majania Road, which is seeing significant estimated cost escalations just due to right-of-way issues on the far west end of it. I would say shoring issues as far as keeping the road up because there's a bluff that just drops off, that's gonna pose a challenge. So those are capital projects. As far as policy level things, really amounts to funding better the behavioral health model across the state. Also watching the housing legislation, as it currently is constructed, opposing that missing middle legislation, because they basically want to ramrod through a requirement that essentially takes away a lot of the zoning ability for cities and adds in for areas they have mass transit, essentially requiring high-rise development, even in rural areas, like stuff that would go beyond the height of Vesper, which would not pencil, so makes no sense. Also clarification on the pursuits, because police, when they're trying to pull over someone violated the law, and then folks are driving off, that's becoming a very commonplace issue across the state. And then also revisiting Growth Management Act, because the predicament that we're in with the whole urban growth area and planning policies, we are not alone in that. So trying to have a more balance of power. And a lot of this is being reflected in AWC priorities, because I'm on that legislative committee, so there's a lot of carryover from that.
Okay. All right. Any questions or comments regarding the legislative, state and legislative agenda? None? All right. Thank you, Mike. We're gonna let your voice rest a little bit. So there's no informational support, reports. There's no executive session. My goodness. I had two things to talk about, but since my mouth won't work, is there any other business for good of the order? If not, do we have a motion to conclude? All right, is there a second?
Second.
Great. If there's no objection, the meeting is concluded at 8:56 p.m. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Good night.
Have a good night.
Bye.
Bye. I'm gonna get home.
Okay.